The room went quiet the second my sister reached across the table and lifted my hand like she was inspecting a piece of fruit at a grocery store. She turned my engagement ring toward the chandelier light, tilted her head, and let out a laugh that sounded like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Oh, Ren, honey, is this real gold, or is it the kind that turns your finger green after a week?" My mother, sitting at the head of the table with her wine glass already half empty, didn't even try to hide her smile. "Well, Bianca, we all know Ren was never going to match your level. Some of us just have to accept what we're given." I felt my face go hot, the kind of heat that starts behind your ears and crawls down your neck, and I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but before I could, Desmond set his napkin down on the table with a precision that felt louder than any shout. He didn't argue, he didn't defend me. He just stood up, buttoned his jacket, looked at my mother for exactly 2 seconds and walked out of the house without a single word. My sister laughed again, this time nervously, and said, "Guess he can't handle a little joke." I didn't know it yet, but by 9 the next morning, her husband would be sitting in a parking lot outside a building he was no longer allowed to enter, and my phone would not stop ringing for the rest of the day. I want to back up, because you need to understand exactly who these people were to me before I tell you what happened after that dinner, and why the silence in that room was so much more dangerous than anyone at that table understood. My name is Ren Ashby, I am 31 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the quiet one in my family, the one who got compared, the one who got measured against my older sister Bianca like she was some kind of ruler I was supposed to line up next to and always come up short. Bianca is 34, 3 years older than me, and from the time we were kids, she was the golden one. She was homecoming queen, she got into the state university on a partial scholarship for dance, and she married a man named Trent Holt when she was 26, a man our mother introduced at every family gathering as my son-in-law, the executive. Even back when Trent was still just a junior analyst climbing the ladder at a logistics and distribution company called Vantage Meridian Group. My mother, Patris Ashby, is the kind of woman who measures love in dollar signs and square footage. She grew up poor, genuinely poor, the daughter of a man who worked 3 jobs and never owned a home, and I think somewhere along the way she decided that the only way to protect her daughters from that kind of poverty was to worship anyone who had money and quietly punish anyone who didn't. She never said it in those exact words, but you didn't need her to say it. You just had to watch how her eyes lit up when Bianca mentioned Trent's new title, and how her eyes went flat and tired whenever I talked about my job. I work as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, helping people relearn how to walk after strokes, after car accidents, after surgeries that took apart their bodies and put them back together slightly wrong. I love my job. I have loved it since I was 23 years old and helped an 81-year-old man named Otis take his first unassisted steps after a hip replacement, and watched him cry harder than I have ever seen a grown man cry, out of pure gratitude that his body still worked. But in my mother's eyes, physical therapy was fine, a word she said the way other people say, unfortunate. She would ask me about my job for exactly 1 polite minute at dinner, and then pivot the entire conversation to Bianca's latest vacation, or the new kitchen island Trent had just bought them, or the private school they were now considering for their son. I stopped expecting anything different a long time ago. I built a life that didn't depend on my mother's approval, because I learned early that her approval was a current that only flowed toward Bianca. Then I met Desmond Calloway. I met him 18 months ago at, of all places, my own clinic. He wasn't a patient. He was there visiting an elderly woman named Constance Farrow, a former mentor of his who was recovering from a knee replacement I had been overseeing for 6 weeks. He showed up every single Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, sat quietly in the waiting area reading actual paperback books instead of scrolling his phone, and always said good morning to me by name after the 2nd week, which surprised me, because most visitors barely register the staff. One Thursday, Constance was having a rough session, frustrated with her progress, close to tears, and Desmond didn't rush in to comfort her the way most family or friends do. He waited until she was done, until I had finished the session and stepped back, and then he crouched WN next to her wheelchair and said quietly, "You did more today than you did last Thursday. That's the whole game, Constance. Just this Thursday versus last Thursday." I remember standing there with my clipboard, completely still, because I had never heard anyone comfort a frustrated patient with that much simple, unshowy wisdom. 2 weeks later, he asked me if I wanted to get coffee sometime. Not dinner, not drinks, just coffee, like he understood that after a 12-hour shift, the last thing I wanted was pressure. Desmond never talked about his job in detail. When I asked, early on, what he did for work, he said, "I work in operations, logistics mostly, kind of boring honestly." And then he changed the subject to ask me about my brother, whom I'd mentioned once in passing, and he remembered his name 3 weeks later. I didn't push. In my experience, men who talk too much about their jobs in the first month are usually compensating for something, and men who deflect are usually either hiding something shameful or just genuinely more interested in you than in themselves. Desmond was the second kind. I found out he drove a 6-year-old Honda Accord with a small crack in the windshield he never bothered to fix, that he lived in a modest 2-bedroom townhouse in a neighborhood that was nice but not flashy, that he cooked simple meals like grilled chicken and steamed vegetables because he said fancy food stressed him out, and that he tipped generously but never made a show of it, sliding cash quietly to servers instead of adding it dramatically to the receipt. Everything about him suggested a man who had enough, who didn't need more, who had made peace with a comfortable, unremarkable life. I fell in love with him precisely because he never once made me feel like I needed to be anyone other than exactly who I was. He proposed on a Tuesday, which he thought was funny, because Tuesday was the day we met. No grand production, no hired photographer hiding in the bushes, no flash mob. We were sitting on the small back patio of his townhouse, eating leftover pasta, and he just reached into his pocket and said, "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks trying to find the right moment, and I've decided there isn't going to be a perfect moment, there's just going to be us, so Ren, will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful to me. It was a modest oval-cut diamond, maybe half a carat, set in white gold, the kind of ring that a man on a comfortable but not extravagant salary might save up for over several months. I cried. I said yes before he even finished the sentence properly. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the version of love that doesn't perform for an audience. This is just quiet and real and mine. I should have known my mother and Bianca would find a way to make it about something else. The dinner in question was supposed to be a simple family celebration, my mother's idea, held at her house 2 weeks after Desmond, and I got engaged. I invited him knowing full well what my family was like, but I also believed, foolishly maybe, that they would behave themselves for one night out of basic decency. Bianca and Trent arrived first, Trent in a sport coat that looked tailored, Bianca in a dress that still had the faint crease marks of being recently purchased, the kind of outfit clearly bought specifically for the occasion of being looked at. My mother had gone all out with the table setting, cloth napkins, the good china that only came out twice a year, and I noticed immediately that she had set the table with Bianca and Trent at the far end near the window, the good seats, as my mother always called them, and Desmond and I closer to the kitchen doorway. Dinner started fine. Small talk, questions about my brother Colton who lives in Ohio and couldn't make it, updates about my mother's garden. Then, about 40 minutes in, right after the main course was served, Bianca leaned over the table, reached for my hand under the guise of admiring my ring, and made her comment about the gold turning my finger green. I want to be clear that this was not said in a teasing, affectionate way between sisters. There was a coldness to it, a performance for Trent and my mother, a way of publicly ranking me beneath her in front of everyone at the table, including the man I was about to marry. And then my mother chimed in with the comment that I will never forget as long as I live. "Well, Bianca, we all know Ren was never going to match your level. Some of us just have to accept what we're given." I felt something crack inside me, quiet and internal, the way ice cracks under weight before it actually gives way. I looked at Desmond, expecting him to look embarrassed for me or angry or at the very least uncomfortable. Instead, his face had gone perfectly still, a stillness I had never seen on him before, not blank exactly, but focused, like a man doing quick arithmetic in his head. He set his fork down first, then his pekin folded once, placed neatly beside his plate. He stood up, buttoned the single button on his gray jacket, and looked directly at my mother, not with anger, but with something closer to disappointment, the kind of look a teacher gives a student who is capable of so much more. "Thank you for dinner, Patris," he said, using her first name, which he had never done before, always calling her Mrs. Ashby out of respect until that exact moment. I think I'll head out. He didn't look at Bianca at all. He turned to me, softened for just a half second, and said, "I'll see you at home, Ren." And then he walked out through the front door, and I heard his car start in the driveway less than a minute later. The table sat in stunned silence for maybe 5 full seconds. Then Bianca laughed, that same rehearsed laugh, and said, "Guess he can't handle a little joke. Sensitive, isn't he?" My mother shook her head and said something about how some men just aren't built for this family's sense of humor, as if the problem was Desmond's thin skin and not the cruelty that had just been served alongside the roast chicken. I sat there, humiliated, furious, and confused, because in a year and a half of dating Desmond Calloway, I had never once seen him walk away from a confrontation, not with rude patients' families, not with aggressive drivers who cut him off, not with anyone. He was the type of man who de-escalated everything with calm words. For him to simply stand up and leave without a single argument told me this wasn't about hurt feelings. This was about him deciding something. And Desmond only ever got quiet like that when a decision had already been made in his head, and there was no point wasting words on people who wouldn't understand it anyway. I left shortly after, ignoring my mother's insistence that I stay for dessert, don't be so dramatic, and drove straight to Desmond's townhouse, my hands shaking on the steering wheel the entire way. When I got there, he was sitting at his small kitchen table with his laptop open, and for a second I thought maybe he was just distracting himself, scrolling something mindless to cool off. But as I got closer, I saw he was on a video call, his camera off, listening intently to a voice I didn't recognize. A man saying something about quarterly logistics, numbers out of the Charlotte distribution hub, and personnel matters in the regional office. I stood in the doorway, confused, and Desmond looked up at me, held up one finger asking for a moment, said into the laptop, "Copy that, send me the personnel file tonight, I want it before I sleep," and then closed the laptop. "Desmond," I said, my voice cracking despite myself, "what was that? Who was that? Are you okay? I'm so sorry about tonight, I should never have brought you into that, I didn't think they would actually." He stood up, crossed the kitchen, and pulled me into a hug before I could even finish the sentence. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said quietly into my hair. "None of that was your fault, not one word of it." I pulled back and looked at him, still confused. "Then what's going on? Who were you just talking to?" He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of pause where you can see someone deciding how much truth to give you. Then he sighed, sat back down at the table, and gestured for me to sit across from him. "Ren, there's something I need to tell you, and I probably should have told you a long time ago, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I genuinely liked not having it be part of us. Part of who we were together." He paused again. "I don't work in operations. I mean, I do technically, but not the way you think. I'm the majority owner and CEO of Vantage Meridian Group." I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark of a laugh, because for a second I genuinely thought he was joking, some strange way of trying to make me feel better after the humiliation at dinner. But his face didn't move. He wasn't joking. "Vantage Meridian," I repeated slowly, and then it hit me, the way a name can sit in the back of your brain for years without ever fully registering its weight until the exact right context clicks into place. Vantage Meridian Group was the company Trent worked for. The company my mother bragged about constantly, the company that had given Trent and Bianca the house with the pool, the SUV, the vacations to places I'd only seen in photos on Bianca's social media. Trent worked in the regional distribution division as, if I remembered correctly from years of half listening at family dinners, a senior operations director. "You're Trent's boss," I said slowly, still not fully able to process it. "You are Trent's actual boss." "I'm the owner of the entire company," Desmond said, not with pride, just with a plain, tired honesty. "I built it from a single warehouse contract 14 years ago into what it is now. I don't do press. I don't do photo ops. I have a management team that runs day-to-day operations specifically so I can stay out of the public eye, because the moment people know who you are, everything about how they treat you changes, and I wanted, just once in my life, to be with someone who liked me for exactly who I was in a room, not for what I could give them. That's why I never talk about work. That's why I drive that stupid car with the cracked windshield. I could buy a fleet of cars, Ren. I just don't want to be a person who needs one. I sat there absorbing all of this, my mind racing backward through 18 months of memories, recalculating everything through this new information. The modest townhouse wasn't modesty out of necessity, it was modesty by choice. The old Honda wasn't a budget constraint, it was a deliberate decision to stay grounded. And somewhere in a house across town, my mother and my sister had just spent an entire dinner mocking the man who, without either of them knowing it, held Trent Holt's entire career in the palm of his hand. "Desmond," I said carefully, "what did that call mean? The one about personnel files?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing something, deciding how honest to be with me in this exact moment. "I called my head of HR on the drive home," he said. "I asked her to pull Trent Holt's personnel file, not because of what your mother and sister said about you, although that mattered to me more than you know. I asked because of something I've been sitting on for about 3 months that I hadn't decided what to do with yet, and tonight made the decision for me." He explained it slowly, carefully, like a man laying out evidence rather than gossip. 3 months earlier, an internal audit in the Charlotte Regional Distribution Hub had flagged irregularities in shipment reporting, numbers that didn't reconcile, expense reports that seemed inflated, vendor contracts that had been quietly redirected to a company that, buried under 2 layers of shell ownership, turned out to be partially owned by Trent's brother. Nothing had been proven conclusively at the time. Desmond, being a careful and fair operator, had asked his internal investigations team to keep building the case quietly rather than accuse an executive without solid ground. Because he had learned over 14 years of running a company that reputations, once damaged, rarely come back fully intact, and he refused to destroy a man's career on a hunch. But tonight, watching my mother and sister behave the way they had, something in him had simply run out of patience for extending grace to people who clearly didn't deserve it. And he decided it was time to stop waiting and finish the review that had been sitting half-completed for weeks. "So this isn't revenge," I said slowly, needing to hear him confirm it. "No," Desmond said firmly. "If Trent Holt were clean, none of what happened at that dinner tonight would have cost him his job, because I don't run my company on grudges, Ren. I never have, and I never will, not even for you, and especially not for myself. But he isn't clean. The evidence has been building for months. Tonight I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices by delaying the process any further. I want to be honest with you. Part of me in that moment felt a flicker of something ugly and satisfying, a feeling I'm not proud of, the anticipation of watching my mother's precious level come crashing down through no fault of my own, simply through the truth finally surfacing. But a bigger part of me felt something heavier, a kind of dread, because I knew exactly how my family would react, and I knew I would be standing in the middle of it whether I wanted to be or not. That night I barely slept. I lay next to Desmond in his bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every dinner, every backhanded comment, every moment my mother had held Bianca and Trent up as the standard I would never reach, and I felt this strange, disorienting mixture of vindication and grief. Grief, because even now, even knowing what I knew, some small childish part of me still wanted my mother to love me without needing a reason to. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 8:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was still in bed, scrolling half asleep, and I watched my sister's name flash across the screen before I even fully processed why she'd be calling me on a Wednesday morning. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 90 seconds later. Then my mother called. Then Bianca again. Then an unknown number that turned out to be Bianca calling from Trent's phone, because I had apparently blocked enough notifications in my sleep haze that she got creative. By 9:15, I had 11 missed calls and a string of texts that started confused and escalated into something closer to panic. "Bianca, Ren, call me right now, Bianca. Something happened at Trent's work. Is this because of last night? Mom, Ren, please call your sister back. Thigh. S is serious, Bianca. Ren, Bianca, did your fiancé do something? Trent says his badge got deactivated this morning and security wouldn't let him in the building. HR is calling him. Please tell me you know something." I sat up in bed, and Desmond, already awake, already dressed, already halfway through a cup of coffee at the small kitchen table, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as calm resignation, the look of a man who had made a decision and was now simply waiting to see how the pieces fell. "It started," he said quietly, not gloating, just stating a fact. They're calling me, I said, showing him my phone. They think I have something to do with it. You don't, he said. I do. But I understand why they'd assume you're the one who can explain it, since as far as they know, you're the only connection between last night and this morning. I decided, after a long moment of staring at my phone, that I was done avoiding this family, done shrinking myself to fit into whatever small box made them comfortable. I called Bianca back. She picked up before the first ring even finished. Ren, oh my God, finally, what is going on? Trent got a call from HR first thing this morning saying he's being placed on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation. They took his laptop. They wouldn't even let him back to his desk to get his personal stuff. This doesn't make any sense. He's been there 8 years. He's a senior director. People don't just get. Bianca, I said, cutting her off, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. I need you to calm down and just listen to me for a second. Calm down, Ren, our entire life is built around his job. Do you understand that? The mortgage on the house, Beckett's private school deposit we just paid. Everything. If this is some kind of joke because of what happened at dinner, then it is not funny. It is genuinely not. It's not a joke, I said. And it's not because of a joke either. Bianca, do you remember Desmond? Your fiancé? Yes, obviously, what does he have to do with? Bianca, Desmond owns Vantage Meridian Group. He's the CEO. He's Trent's boss. He has been Trent's boss this entire time you and Mom have been calling him beneath our family. There was a silence on the other end of the line so complete that for a second I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her breathing change, quick and shallow, the sound of someone doing rapid mental math and not liking any of the answers they were arriving at. That can't be right. Vantage's CEO is some guy named Desmond Calloway, I said. Look it up. Corporate filings, state business registry, it's all public record if you actually search instead of assuming. He just doesn't do interviews or photo shoots. He built the company himself. He drives a 6-year-old Honda Bianca. That's the man you told turns green fingers into some kind of punchline. Oh my God, she whispered, and I heard something shift in her voice, real fear now, not indignation. Oh my God, Ren, is this because of last night? Did he do this because of what I said about the ring? I took a breath because even in this moment, some old instinct in me wanted to protect her from the full truth, wanted to soften the blow the way I'd been trained to do my whole life. But I decided, right there, that I was done doing that. No, I said honestly. It's not because of the ring. There's an internal investigation that's been going on for months, something about shipment reports and vendor contracts and a company connected to Trent's brother. Last night just accelerated something that was already coming. He wasn't going to let it slide forever just because Trent is my sister's husband. The sound Bianca made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. His brother's company, she repeated, and something in the tone told me she knew exactly what I was talking about, that this wasn't news to her the way it should have been if she and Trent had nothing to hide. Ren, I need you to talk to him. Please, can you talk to Desmond? Can you ask him to? No, I said, and I felt the word land solid and final in my chest. I'm not going to do that. He's my husband, Ren. We have a son. If he loses this job, we lose everything, the house, Beckett's school, everything. Please, I am begging you. You don't understand what this. I understand exactly what this is, I said, and something in me that had been quiet for 31 years finally found its voice. You spent my entire life telling me I would never match your level. You held my ring up like it was something to be pitied. Mom sat there and told the man I love that he wasn't good enough for this family, in front of everyone, without knowing a single true thing about him. And now you want me to go beg him to protect your husband from the consequences of what sounds like actual fraud. Bianca, I love you, you're my sister, but I am not going to insert myself into a corporate investigation to save you from a mess you and Trent built yourselves. That's not cruelty. That's just not my business to fix. She was crying now, full and unguarded, the kind of crying I hadn't heard from her since we were kids and our father left. Some old part of me wanted to comfort her anyway, the automatic reflex of a younger sister who had spent a lifetime absorbing everyone else's emotional weather. I stayed quiet instead, let the silence sit, let her cry it out without rushing to fix it for her. Mom's going to call you, she finally said, her voice thick. She already tried Trent, tried me, she's probably dialing you right now. She was right. My mother called 40 minutes later, and I almost didn't pick up, but some part of me wanted to hear what she would say, wanted to know if she would apologize or double down. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Ren, your sister just told me the most insane story about your fiancé being some secret millionaire who owns Trent's company. Please tell me that's not true. Please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding. It's true, I said simply. Then you need to fix this, she said immediately. No hesitation, no acknowledgement of the previous night, straight to demands, exactly as I expected. You call him right now and you tell him this has gone too far. Trent has a family, he has a mortgage. This is not a game, Ren. Families do not do this to each other. I felt something in my chest go very still, very cold, very clear. Families don't do this to each other, I repeated slowly. Mom, you humiliated my fiancé at your own dinner table 2 weeks after we got engaged. You told him, in front of the entire family, that I would never match Bianca's level. You didn't know who he was, you didn't care to know who he was, you decided his worth before he'd even finished his meal, based on nothing but a car he doesn't drive and a job you assumed was small. And now that it turns out he's not small at all, now that it turns out you insulted a man who could buy this entire neighborhood without blinking, suddenly you want me to run interference for the family that spent 31 years telling me I wasn't worth as much as my sister. That is not fair, my mother said, her voice rising. I have always loved you both equally, I have always. You haven't, I said, and my voice didn't even shake, which surprised me more than anything else that morning. You have never once, in my entire life, looked at me the way you look at Bianca when she talks about Trent's promotions or their vacations. I stopped expecting it a long time ago, Mom. I built a whole life without it. And I am not going to spend the first month of my engagement begging the man I love to bury an internal investigation, just because it's suddenly inconvenient for the family that couldn't be bothered to be decent to him for one single dinner. So you're choosing him over your own sister, she said, the classic pivot, the guilt lever she always pulled when cornered. No, I said, I'm choosing not to interfere in something that has nothing to do with me. There's a difference, Mom, even if you've never been able to see it. She hung up on me. I sat there on the edge of Desmond's bed, phone still warm in my hand, and I did not cry, which surprised me. I felt, instead, a strange, quiet lightness, like I had been carrying something heavy for 31 years without realizing it, and someone had finally taken it off my shoulders. Over the next several days, the situation at Vantage Meridian unfolded with a kind of clinical inevitability that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with process. Desmond didn't personally oversee the investigation. He told me, because he believed strongly in not letting his own feelings contaminate a fair process, so he handed the entire matter to his general counsel and head of internal audit, with strict instructions that they follow exactly the same protocol they would use for any employee at any level, no shortcuts, no special treatment in either direction. What they found, over the following 2 weeks, was worse than even the initial flags suggested. Trent Holt had been quietly steering a portion of the regional distribution hub's trucking and warehousing contracts toward a logistics subcontractor called Ridgeline Freight Solutions, a company that on paper had no connection to him at all, but which was, according to state business filings, his own brother had apparently forgotten to fully scrub, 30% owned by Trent's younger brother, Marcus Holt, and quietly financed, in part by a loan Trent had personally guaranteed. The contracts had been awarded without the standard competitive bidding process, at rates roughly 18% above market average, and over 3 years, the arrangement had funneled just over $400,000 in excess costs to Vantage Meridian, translating into a very comfortable secondary income stream for the Holt family that Bianca's lifestyle had clearly been quietly built on top of. I learned all of this from Desmond in pieces over the following 2 weeks, not because he wanted to make me feel vindicated, but because he believed, correctly, that I deserved to understand the full picture rather than be left wondering. Trent was formally terminated for cause 11 days after that dinner, which under his contract meant no severance, no cushion, nothing beyond his final paycheck for hours worked. The company also pursued a civil claim to recover the excess costs, which meant Trent and Bianca were not just losing an income, they were facing an actual financial clawback that would gut whatever savings they had left. Bianca called me 4 more times over those 2 weeks. I answered twice. The first time, she asked if I could convince Desmond to at least let Trent resign quietly instead of being fired for cause, so it wouldn't follow him on paper. I told her I wouldn't ask him that, and I meant it not out of spite, but because I had decided, somewhere in that first phone call, that I was done being the family's designated fixer, the one who smoothed things over so everyone else could avoid consequences. The second time I answered, she didn't ask for help. She just cried and told me she was scared that she didn't know how they were going to make the mortgage payment, that Beckett kept asking why Daddy was home all the time now, and somewhere in the middle of that call, for the first time in years, I actually felt something soften in me, not enough to intervene, but enough to say gently, "Bianca, I'm not going to fix this for you, but I'm still your sister, and if you need to talk, actually talk, not ask me to run interference, I'm here." She was quiet for a long moment and then said, very small, "I'm sorry about the ring thing. I don't even know why I said it. I think I've just always needed you to be a little bit smaller than me, so I could feel like I was doing something right with my life." It wasn't a full apology, and it definitely wasn't accountability for everything, but it was more honesty than I had heard from her in 15 years, and I let myself hold onto that small piece of it. My mother, for her part, took much longer to come around, and honestly, in some ways she never fully did. She called me once, about 3 weeks after the dinner, not to apologize, but to ask, almost casually, whether Desmond might consider helping Trent find something else, somewhere, since he's family now, technically. I told her that Desmond didn't owe Trent anything, that consequences existing wasn't a design flaw to be worked around, and that if she wanted a relationship with me going forward, it needed to start with actually acknowledging what she'd said at that dinner table, instead of skipping straight to asking for favors. She didn't apologize that day either. She said, "I don't understand why you're being so cold about this," and I said, "I'm not being cold, Mom, I'm being clear, for the first time in my life, and I know that feels different to you, but it's not the same thing," and I ended the call gently but firmly. Desmond and I got married 5 months later in October in a small ceremony at a botanical garden outside Asheville, just under 60 guests, mostly his side, a handful of close friends from the clinic on mine. I invited my mother. I invited Bianca. I did not invite Trent, and nobody asked me to explain that decision, which told me they understood exactly why. My mother came, sat quietly in the second row, and cried during the vows in a way that felt, for once, genuinely unguarded rather than performative. Bianca came without Trent, wearing a dress that was clearly not new, and hugged me longer than she had hugged me in years, whispering "I'm proud of you" into my ear in a voice that cracked in the middle, and I chose in that moment to believe her. Trent, as it turned out, never fully recovered professionally the way people sometimes do after these things. Word travels fast in regional logistics circles, and a termination for cause tied to a vendor kickback scheme is not the kind of thing that quietly disappears from an industry's memory. He eventually found work at a smaller distribution company 2 states away, at what I understood to be a significantly reduced salary, and Bianca told me, almost a year later over coffee, that they'd had to sell the house, downsize into a rental, pull Beckett out of the private school. She told me this without bitterness, which surprised me, more like someone reporting facts about a storm that had already passed through and left the landscape changed. "I used to think all that stuff was what made us better than you," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Turns out none of it was ever really ours to begin with. It was just borrowed, and eventually somebody comes to collect." I think about that dinner a lot, honestly, more than I probably show. I think about how close I came to apologizing for Desmond's exit that night, how instinctive it was for me to want to smooth things over, protect everyone's comfort except my own. I think about how one quiet man standing up from a table, buttoning his jacket, and walking out without raising his voice ended up changing the entire architecture of my family, not because he wanted revenge, but because he simply stopped being willing to extend patience to people who hadn't earned it. And I think about my mother's words that night, the ones that were meant to cut me down, "You'll never match her level." And how strange it is that within 24 hours, the entire definition of what her level even meant had collapsed completely, revealing it was never anything but borrowed money and performed superiority all along. These days, my relationship with my mother is better, though it will probably never be what I once wished it could be. She has, slowly, over the past year, started asking real questions about my work at the clinic, has even come to visit once, sat in the waiting room and watched me help a woman named Odalise relearn to grip a coffee cup after a stroke. And afterward she told me, quietly in the car, "I never understood what you actually do until just now." I'm sorry it took me this long to ask. It wasn't a full reckoning with 31 years of favoritism, but it was something. And I've learned that sometimes something is what you build on, slowly, brick by brick, rather than waiting for a moment of perfect, total apology that might never come. Desmond still drives that same Honda with the cracked windshield, by the way. I asked him once, half joking, if he was ever going to fix it, and he just smiled and said, "Every time I see that crack, I remember exactly what kind of person I want to be married to, and exactly what kind of people I don't have time for anymore." I think about that a lot too, how the smallest details of a person, the car they drive, the way they fold a napkin before standing up from a table, the way they comfort a frustrated old woman in a wheelchair without an audience watching, tell you more about their actual character than any title ever could. My mother and my sister spent years measuring worth in granite countertops and vacation photos, and it took one quiet man standing up from a dinner table to show them, without ever raising his voice, exactly how little any of that had ever really meant.